Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening and happy holidays, everybody. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, on Talking Weird for the Untold Radio Network. I hope everybody had a lovely Christmas, all of you who celebrate, and those who don't, I hope you had a relaxing day anyway. In Australia, it still would have today been, it was in Monday. Is it Monday now? Yeah. Or is it? No, it's Tuesday. I'm losing track of time because Christmas was Monday. In Tuesday, it would still have been a public holiday. It would be Boxing Day because we never split from the empire like those of you in America, in the United States did. And so I think the English introduced a holiday after 1776, which was another public holiday where I believe the rich packaged up their gifts they didn't want, boxed them up and gave them to the poor or their servants or something. So when my mailman delivered today, I was like, if you were working for the post office in Australia, it would have been a public holiday. You wouldn't have been working. He was like, no Boxing Day for me. So I hope everybody who enjoys Boxing Day enjoyed it. I enjoyed mine. It was fairly relaxing and I had a wonderful Christmas. For those of you who watched the show last week, my mother is visiting the Northwoods from Australia. And if you didn't see that show, you should, because you hear all kinds of strange stories about where I grew up and about my past. It was lovely to have my mother, obviously, on the show last week. And this week, I have probably one of my very closest friends in the United States of America. So it's like the family and friends holiday editions of Talking Weird that I'm enjoying doing at the moment and subjecting all of you to. But many of you will know tonight's guest. He's an author, illustrator, and biblical paranormal researcher. He lives in Waxahachie, and I bet I mispronounced that, Texas, with his 3 children and beautiful and long-suffering wife. Beyond his lifelong love of art and comics, his life has been consumed with the study of archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, and astronomy in order to better understand the Bible, its teachings, and the one behind its creation. So I'm so delighted to welcome to Talking Weird, my old co-host from the Mysterious Library show that many of you might have enjoyed, that used to be on this time slot on the Untold Radio Network, the one, the only, the magnificent Jason McLean.
Happy Boxing Day, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Thank you, Mr. Jason McLean. Did you enjoy Boxing Day or the American equivalent? I guess you're just back to work. It's like,
yeah, the American equivalent of Boxing Day is going back to work. And no, I did not. I mean, it was fine. It wasn't anything overly weird today. Just I really didn't want to be there. I would have loved to have reveled in the joys of Boxing Day, but I didn't. So anyway, happy Boxing Day.
Now, well, what I was going to say is I love the American holiday system and I love the American work ethic. But I do think people are in a way cheated not to have a public holiday after Christmas, because who wants their Christmas to end knowing that they have to get up the next day? If you get that extra day buffer, you can, if you drink or party or stay up late, you wake up the next day and you're still in the spirit. And in Australia, something else, it's probably changing a little now, but for most of my life, Australia's tended to close down all the way from Christmas Eve until, after New Year's Day. The city just seemed to stop, If you lived in a suburb and went to the local stores, they'd even be closed. There'd be nobody there. Everybody was on holiday and just relaxing. So I think that is
I can get
one,
behind that.
yeah,
Just
one thing Australia got right
shut
was,
down.
yeah, that attitude to the holidays. I think that's a great attitude. But how was your Christmas and other than
Oh,
your Boxing Day? How was that aspect of it?
it was good. Because I'm right there with you. The whole like, let's just take the whole week off. Because like, I don't even do anything fun like that. I'm boring. I made queso for Christmas, and I woke up this morning. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I had to get to work 30 minutes earlier too because I do the Texas stuff, and the Texas coworker, she's out this week, so it's like I got to be there a little bit earlier for SLA stuff. So I'm like, man, this idea of just being shut down for a week, I like that idea. It's like, hey, it's Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. Nobody wants to do anything anyway. Just don't do it. Love that idea. Y'all got that right. So you got that, and you got Steve Irwin. And Crocodile Dundee. So I'm good.
That's true.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think
you got those three things going for you, man.
then
I'm
again,
saying.
look, Irwin got taken out by a stingray or something.
Yeah,
And old Dundee, the man that Dundee was based on, I think died in some shootout when they came to get him or something. It's my
really.
understanding. Like the
Oh, I
person that
did not.
Crocodile Dundee was based on was, I guess, I don't know, like
Mm.
who happened to hear somebody like in Waco or what was the Behold the Pale Horse guy,
Oh,
Bill Cooper, right?
yeah.
Like, so he must have had. I did read the story years ago. I don't know if it was like they went to get him for tax evasion or a warrant or something, but for whatever reason,
Yeah. Not the
yeah.
actor, the actual guy. The
Yeah,
character.
not Paul Hogan. Although here you go is another issue perhaps with Australia. When Paul Hogan returned at one stage, the Australian when I used to write for the Spectator, I wrote an opinion piece on this, and the Australian government I think wouldn't let him leave the country because they said because he moved to America. They said that he owed them some incredible tax debt.
Yeah, I remember that. That's why I was like, it's got to be. Yeah, it can't be Paul Hogan who. Okay, now I need to know. I need to know what happened to the guy that Crocodile Dundee's based on.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Paul Hogan. Thankfully, didn't die in some shootout, but he did. The guy who played Crocodile Dundee, not the real Crocodile Dundee, but the Paul Hogan, the actor who I grew up on the Paul Hogan show as a child. He was so funny. But I wrote a piece saying everywhere I've been when I've traveled. This is when I still lived in Australia. I would say everywhere I went, because of Paul Hogan and because of the Australian Tourist Commission ads, which always start him throw another shrimp on the barbie, and because of the iconic "That's not a knife" line from Crocodile Dundee, and just just the general awareness. I don't know how many times it got me free beers in bars from people going, "Oh, you're an Australian, throw another shrimp on the barbie, mate," and the general goodwill that Paul Hogan had elicited from around the world. I'm like, they should be cutting him a check. He was the greatest ambassador any country's ever had.
Yeah. Oh, being from Dallas as a Texan, trust me, even in the 90s, people were like, oh, who shot JR? Like, I mean, I get it. Like, I get it. It's like, yeah, Paul Hogan was amazing. I love Paul Hogan. But yeah, now I need to know what happened to the guy that Crocodile Dundee's based. I didn't realize he was based on a real person.
Yeah,
I thought he was just a character that was
there's a
okay.
story out there about him. You can tell you and I haven't talked for like, I don't know, months, because the first like 10 minutes of this show is just you and I catching up with crazy holiday stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
Enjoy,
like
audience.
I've been using my time, since I've done a terrible job of retiring because
Man, you've done the worst retirement job I've ever seen. You're on podcasts all the time still.
I'm on Donnie's thing. I hopped on with Blondes and Booze, Texas Front Porch a couple times. I'm going back, I think, on the 8th. Josh Turner, like I can't get away from these these podcasts. But I've been trying to use the time wisely. Get some things off my plate. Worked on a couple comics. I'm actually a 12-page comic, superhero comic. I'm throwing it at Arctic Press. I'll let y'all know when that comes out. I'll see if they take it. If not, I'll self-publish it because I like it. The 3 pages down on it, meaning fully inked, lettered, colored, the whole 9 yards. So I think I can have it done by the end of next week. So that'll be fun. And then I go back to doing my normal stuff. I'm sort of revamping a lot of things. Serial Papers, which was, it was a real thing. It was a real thing. However, it started off as a fictional sort of story, a vehicle to talk about this stuff. And I was like, you know what, let's make it real. And of course, it kind of, when I don't work well with other people. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take it back. Serial Papers is going to go back to being a fictional thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm combining Chuppy Rules. For those of you who saw the Chuppy Rules comic, it's going to be a part of it. it's going to be a lot of fun. So that gets revamped this spring, and I'm working on 2 new books that'll and a website to go with both of them. And I would like that to not necessarily be my final word on all of this stuff, but I just feel like I kind of want to get it out there. It's like, boom, here's everything I have to say on these subjects and give you all the information. So if how Bigfoot or how UFOs and Bigfoot prove the Bible is true it was a pamphlet. It really was more of a pamphlet to get people thinking about it. And it's like, oh, I shouldn't be afraid of this thing from looking at this stuff from a Christian perspective. This is going to be never the final word, but my full thoughts on the whole matter on both sides. And it's like, here's all the evidence. Here's why I have come to these conclusions. Like, here's everything. And it won't be quite as lengthy as say Joshua Cutchin's work, but it'll be a lot more. It'll be a lot of fun visually. But I want to say my piece, have it there, put it out there, and then maybe go do something else. I don't know. Like I'm never going to be out of this world, out of this realm, but maybe go back to doing some other things. So
I can't wait to see all of that. Obviously, because I'd read your UFOs and Bigfoot / Bible book. I never get the title right. I'd read that before I met you. Like I had that book in my library before I'd ever had you on the show. So I'm always keen. Yeah, absolutely. And that was how we first met, because I reached out to you and had you on Talking Weird before the Untold Radio Network.
Yeah.
So I'm always eager, and I've obviously got your Metroplex monsters, so I can't wait to have more, and some of your prophecy books. I can't wait to have more materials from you, Jason. But let's slide into the year in review. Or you and I will just be like catching up and chatting for the whole show. Now I know I think we were going to, and please, audience members, if there's something you think which was really important that happened this year, or interesting in the broader Fortean paranormal, even anything super weird, ufological, cryptozoological world, drop it in the comments, because we might, we'll put it on screen regardless, but we might even chat about it a little bit. But we were going to start with people who had passed this year.
Yeah.
And I think you were going to do the first one, because
I'll do the first one.
In fact, we bonded over this man's writings while he was still alive. I think that's what made us friends initially.
First of all, Donnie, I can't do both, so I need you to pick one. Secondly, Michael Heiser, sadly, tragically passed this year. We've bonded over his work. The man. What's really interesting is I would say I was 95% of the way of what he was in the way of what he was talking, because I think all of it really is very accessible. But what he did is he got that last 5% to sync up. I always say he allowed the transmission tines to really get in sync, to really get that torque in there with his work on Deuteronomy 32, right? And being able to say, hey, look at it from this perspective, and it allowed a lot of things to really sync up for me. And it is tragic that he's passing, because, well, I would argue the most important work he did is obviously in the biblical text. He was also on this side of the fringe world with us. Like he was a colleague. Like, even though we've never met, I would never even dream of being that important. He was in many ways a colleague of ours, because he was on this side having this conversation, saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this weird stuff. I think we definitely had some disagreements, but again, the man was brilliant. He did a lot of amazing work. And he even said the most important work he did was not necessarily coming up with everything, but rather transmitting these ideas that academia talks about all the time behind the paywall, and making it accessible to the layman. And his works have been highly influential and very beneficial, because now people kind of know what you and I are talking about a lot of times because of Heiser's work. So it is absolutely tragic, his passing. And we did talk about it on Mysterious Library when it happened, but that I think was probably the hardest passing this year of public figures. If you said, hey, Jason, who hit you hardest for the last couple of years? Obviously Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and then you've got Michael Heiser. I mean, just straight up. Actually, probably Rick Leonardi hit me a lot harder than Stan Lee. because his work has been so influential in my life. But then Michael Heiser hit, and it's like, it's not just the that personal attention or affection that you have for him. It is the impact that he had on his work. It's like, who could possibly step in to fill that void? And it hits you personally, but it also hits you professionally, because you're like, man, that's such a loss.
Yeah, I know. Before he passed, when I would talk to, like, Christian school mums at my daughter's homeschool community day, people were conscious of the type of things you and I address regularly on Mysterious Library because of Michael Heiser. And these women you never would have expected 20 years ago to have understood these ideas of the divine council and the Nephilim and the connection with other paranormal. It was like having conversations with these ladies, and they were already switched on, and they weren't in the paranormal space at all, but they'd already been exposed to it because of Heiser. And Heiser's passing, to be honest, rattled me a little bit. When I knew he was going, a friend, I think I'd posted something on Facebook just saying, prayers for Michael Heiser or something. And then a friend of mine reached out to me who'd been involved with a US company here, which was a medical research company, which had developed this brand new pancreatic cancer treatment, a late stage one, which is what he was in. And I panicked. I mean, I thought, I have this information, and my friend in Australia was like, you really should try to reach anybody involved with Heiser to get this information to him. And I didn't have any direct contact. I obviously contacted the webpage addresses and people I knew who knew Heiser, and probably nobody wanted to respond because Heiser was at, this last stage and probably closing down with his family and things. And shortly thereafter, he passed. So it may well have been too late, even if he had got that treatment. But I took it very personally. It really did upset me. And I don't normally get upset when people I don't personally know leave this world, but I was really upset with the Heiser passing. There was another significant author that I believe had looked at his book. I think it's The Hunt for Bigfoot. It was one of the first shows I think we did on Mysterious Library, and I think he was still alive there. And that, of course, was Peter Byrne, one of the four horsemen of Bigfoot research. And certainly when I grew up, he was probably the face of Bigfoot research. You would see him on almost every Bigfoot documentary. He'd be on every episode of In Search Of that they did on the Yeti or on Bigfoot. He was then, I'm trying to think who the equivalent would be today. There's probably nobody that big, but maybe somebody like a Ken Gerhard, or a Lyle Blackburn, or a Matt Moneymaker, or somebody that people are used to seeing all the time. But the thing is, it seemed like at the time, Peter Byrne was almost all of these personalities because he was the big one. You saw John Green occasionally, and you saw Renee occasionally, and you saw Grover Krantz occasionally. But it seemed Peter Byrne, perhaps because of his British accent, and perhaps because the fact that he'd hunted for the Yeti and this and the other, he was really the face of Bigfoot research.
Oh, he was.
And he was old, though. He had a great innings. He was 90-something, I think. When he passed, right?
I mean, that's a good run for anybody. So particularly someone who's running around the Himalayas and all that. I mean, that's a solid run, man. I mean,
it's probably why his lungs had probably been sucking in that Himalayan air. He was probably adjusted to all kinds of hardship for the years of out there in the field.
Exactly. I mean, everyone I know who spends their time in the field, right, actually hunting or actually doing archaeology, you see them and they're like 87 and they're like hauling bags of grain, and they're like throwing them and they look like they're 53 and you're like, what the heck is going on? So yeah, I mean, dude had a great run. Again, you don't get more influential than that man in this field, straight up. And it was a huge loss, but again, like I said, he's in his 90s. I think it's like, dude, it's definitely not, it's time. It's okay. You had a good solid run. You did a lot of work. You should be proud of what you did.
We also lost somebody who was probably less of a researcher and more of a famous witness, perhaps one of the most famous early abductee witnesses. And that was this man right here, Calvin Parker, who was abducted along with Charles Hickson in October 11th, 1973 in Mississippi while fishing on the banks of the Pascagoula River. And this is before perhaps UFO abductions and alien beings had been homogenized into the generic gray alien that everybody thinks of instantly when aliens or alien abduction is talked about today. beings, which I'm showing on screen now, are these strange levitating creatures with like crab-like claws and 3 strange protrusions sticking out of their head and weird feet. And apparently when Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson were taken to the police station after this abduction, the sheriff or the head police officer had recorded or had put a recording machine in the cell they were held in, and supposedly they were unaware of it, and it seemed like they genuinely weren't hoaxing this this experience. Anyway, Calvin Parker was in a way, again, one of the most famous witnesses in the history of UFO abductions, and we lost him. And in the history of UFOs, period, actually, and we lost him also this year.
Yeah, it's, again, very sad.
And if anybody knows somebody I haven't mentioned, please put it up on the screen. We also lost, of course, Richard Belzer, who was a famous stand-up comic and comedian and actor, and also an author. And he wrote a number of books in the conspiracy and UFO space, and perhaps is one of those people. There's a few in Hollywood. I guess Dan Aykroyd is another well-known person who likes to put his feet into the world of the paranormal and to Hollywood. But this was somebody who was well known to have both conspiratorial and ufological interests, as well as a very well-known face in Hollywood. So Richard Belzer was another one that we lost.
I'll be honest, I didn't even know that he was a comedian at first. I knew him through Homicide: Life on the Street. We just lost Andre Braugher. I loved that actor. Like, I loved his work. I wish he got more work. But like I was introduced to Richard Belzer through Homicide: Life on the Street, and it's the same character. When they moved him over to Law and Order, that's the same character. Munch, when they moved him over there, like, that's the same. It's not the same actor playing a similar role. They're like, no, they got the same character, and they just transferred him over because everyone loved him so much.
Hey, so that's interesting. I didn't follow those shows enough to actually know that. Ken Brock mentioned something, not to do with anyone in specific, but something we will definitely be touching on later in the show. That was the Congress hearing on UFOs was lame, and we will be getting to that. Oh, okay. I forgot about that. I don't think Rosemary Ellen Guiley, I think she passed before 2023, didn't she?
I was in 2022.
Yeah, but it was a good point to point that out, Nancy. Well, when Jason's talking a minute, I'll actually Google and make sure I'm correct, but I think it was a little earlier.
There's someone else who literally just passed. I was just thinking about this, and hold on, let me see if I can find it, because like he just passed very recently.
Is it something in the cryptozoological world?
No. UFO researcher, and I'm gonna forget. Again, y'all know how bad I am with names. Oh, darn it! And of course, now that it's like I just had it on my feed, and I'm completely forgetting. Hold on. And of course, now I can't find it. It was all over my feed like 2 seconds ago, and now I can't find it.
It might pop into your head while we're chatting later.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway. Well, again, you know how bad I am with names, and that's just not one of those things.
Well, again, if we've missed anybody, the audience can chime in. I appreciate Nancy's suggestion. I'm about to Google that in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptozoology, I think, because that's your space.
Yeah.
More so than mine. And we chatted a little bit before the show, but give me some of your thoughts on what were the takeaways in that field in 2023.
Not a whole lot of news this year in cryptozoology in general. I mean, people doing great things, right? Solid work, but nothing really came forward that was anything really too new. Actually, Doug of Hijack, the guy who created Monster Quest, runs this channel, probably one of the more important cryptozoologists of the last 30 years, with his work promoting it. He probably, had probably the biggest sort of singular news this year when he's, again, at the digital convention they did just a couple months ago. He showed, they've gotten new stabilization of the Patterson-Gimlin footage, and there appears to be evidence of a herniated muscle in Patty's leg. That's only, again, you can see it as she's walking. The muscle cramps up, and it's indicative of a herniated muscle, something that you really can't fake. And so it goes back into this. Here's one more piece of evidence showing that this is probably a biological creature that is being seen. That here, this is just not a detail. Somebody's going to think to put in a hoax video, and it would be almost impossible for them to have done it at the time, much less now. So that's probably the largest singular thing this year. But really, I think the bigger push this year is in cryptozoology is that people are starting to talk about living pterosaurs more. Used to be nobody did, right? Nobody talked about it at all. But this year, about late summer, there were a bunch of people talking about it on TikTok, and it just seems like people are finally willing to speak about it more. Used to be nobody did. Oh wait, I was way off. I thought it was 2022 she passed. Nobody would talk about this at all. Now all of a sudden, people are willing to talk about it. And this year there was even a bit of a flap. I'm not convinced it was necessarily real because it seemed to all be coming out of one channel, right, on TikTok. So I'm not going to say that I necessarily thought it was real per se, but it was interesting to see people talking about it in a more reasoned way. People were willing to come forward and talk about this this year in a way that I haven't seen before. Even what's his name? Charlemagne the God. He's a urban talk show, host, kind of a guy real big on the urban radio network. He's been talking about it finally. So I think that sort of helped push it over the edge into acceptability. Used to be in the cryptid field, you could talk about, Bigfoot, and that was in Loch Ness Monster, Mothman a little bit. Dogman started getting acceptable in the 2000s a little bit. There were a few others that you could talk about, but pterosaurs never discussed, with the exception of, again, people like Ken Gerhardt. But it just wasn't really a big thing that was addressed, unless you're talking about Papua New Guinea. People were cool with with the Ropin and even the Kongomato, but pterosaurs here in the U.S. were kind of a touchy subject. But this year, it's become much easier for people to talk about them. I think that's probably the biggest event. It's not one singular event; it's just more the fact that it's become more popular to talk about. So it's sort of coming into its own. People aren't as afraid to talk about it, which means we're going to get more information. We're going to get more eyewitnesses, and that's always a good thing.
And that's near and dear to your heart, of course. I'm sure most of our audience know, who've been regular viewers, particularly on Mysterious Library. But you yourself witnessed a pterosaur back in the day.
Yep, that's sort of what got me into all this way back in the day. Whether I realized it or not, again, I can. On retrospect, it became obvious, but it's, at the time I didn't necessarily realize that's what I was doing, but yeah. So,
and that was in Texas.
Yeah. Again, it wasn't, you could find, records of stuff down south, right? But at the time, no one was talking about it when I had my encounter, and particularly not in North Texas. People, everyone knows Texas is big, but it's really big. So something that's happening in the Rio Grande Valley has nothing to do with the Dallas area. And so it was very easy to sort of just think that I didn't have an encounter. It must have been something else. It had to have been something else, only to find that people have had these encounters up here. And it's one of those things where material was out there, but even within the cryptozoological field, living pterosaurs were not a big thing, right? You had people who did take, again, Ken Gerhardt being the biggest person to really keep track of this, but it just wasn't a very prominent thing. But this year, people have been more willing to come forward, more willing to talk about it. And hey, I'm all for it, because we need people willing to come forward to talk about these things, to actually start figuring this stuff out. So,
and Gerhard and Blackburn did a kind of pilot documentary of a series of their own, which they were going to launch. I think it was called American Monster Tour, where they went looking for stories of pterosaurs in America. And you're one of the witnesses on that show.
Yeah, it was actually the first time I'd ever publicly told my story. And again, this is one of those things I've recently recounted. I had known Ken for a couple of years. Like, I'm trying to think about how long it'd been. It had been a good long while, and I never thought to tell him because I didn't believe me until they were doing the pilot and we got to talking about it. And I found out no, there were people in Oklahoma just across the Red River. So just, like an hour away from me. And I'm like, okay, hold on. And then I saw he showed me one of the statuettes that, because we'd done my interview. He's like, oh, by the way, we have one of the statuettes that one of the eyewitnesses made. And it was doing the way he had it, was doing the S-curve neck thing. And I was like, okay, that seals it for me. That is what I saw, because that's a detail you're not going to come up with, because it's not a detail that someone's going to put in any of these, dinosaur movies. When people make dinosaur movies, they're not using their amphiractoid, and when they are, they're certainly not having them, arc their neck back or anything like that. So it was just such a confirmation, and so that's what started my investigation into the field in North Texas, very specifically. And everyone says the same thing. They thought they were looking at a crane or heron or a pelican, because they all have the same sort of shape. They do the S-curve thing with their necks, until they took a closer look. And it's exactly what I thought. I thought I was looking at a blue heron at first, until it was 5 feet in front of me. So, I really think one of the ways these things have been able to hide for so long is we're not expecting to see them. And so we're not really looking. And when they are seen, they look so much like a heron or one of these other familiar birds that you just write it off and you go back to doing whatever you're doing, driving, looking at your phone, whatever. But there was this time period this year where a lot of people were really talking about, again, there was this TikTok thing. People were talking about it in Canada, it's sort of like Southern Canada, Northern United States. But it was only like 1 or 2 channels that were really tracking it. So I was like, I don't know that it's necessarily real. However, it showed a lot of other people talking about it. And that's the main thing, is that this year, these kinds of encounters are becoming more common to talk about. And I think that's important.
Indeed. And before we talk a little bit more about cryptozoology, Asper60, who is actually either Jay Katz or his wonderful wife, Aspasia, who host the fantastic Down South Anomalies on this network, the Untold Radio Network, reminded me of somebody. I don't know how I forgot to mention that they passed in 2023, because I didn't know the man well. I'd read both of his books, and I'd certainly had Facebook communication with him, and I talked about having him on the show at some stage. We just never got around to it. But that was Robbie Graham, who wrote Silver Screen Sources, which is excellent, and he also edited the very significant UFOs Reframing the Debate, which is worth reading for a number of essays in there, but particularly Greg Bishop has an amazing essay on the idea of co-creation of the phenomenon, that somehow maybe it's us and it's whatever the phenomenon is, kind of in some feedback loop's the wrong term, but feeding off each other and together creating these type of experiences. So it was very sad when we lost Robbie. I know he left a young daughter behind, and as a father of a young daughter myself, it's just such a tragic story. And people should, if they haven't read Silver Screen Sources and they haven't read Reframing the Debate, they should. And they can go and check out, I think what was one of the very last interviews with Robbie was on episode 5 of Down South Anomalies. So wherever you're watching or listening this podcast today, just rewind on the Untold Radio Network back to Down South Anomalies episode 5, and you'll see Jay and Asper having a wonderful conversation with Robbie Graham.
I'm still looking up for that person who passed away.
I was going to ask you another question. Now, talking about perhaps we've probably talked about what some of the more significant changes in cryptozoology, or what you thought were the most significant anyway. But there was also some, I suppose, sightings which may or may not have been based on anything. And you pay far more attention to this than me. I know the one that seemed to catch the most media attention and Facebook attention was the video of a supposed Sasquatch from some tourist train in Colorado. That was big news for about a week.
Yeah, it was. And the thing is, I am glad to see that there are more people out there who are willing to put things through their paces, because the thing is, a lot of, and this is both the pros and cons of social media. The pro is information can get out there. The con is it's much easier to either hoax something or have something taken out of context. Because the problem is that video is taken from a train ride, and that's part of the gag, right? Is that a guy in a suit comes out and it looks like, so it was framed as if this was a real thing, right? From the video. And a lot of us, when we first saw it, were like, hold on, we've seen that, we know what that, it's a publicly available costume. But the worst part is you didn't even have to go and show that it was a publicly available costume. Outside of the fact the video just kind of makes it really look like it is just a guy in a costume, is that the train ride, I think, had the word Sasquatch in it. Like, it's clear that this is sort of a setup thing. But that context was removed from it, right? So it was big news, and I've seen this a lot where, again, I don't want to get too conspiratorial. I know, surprise, surprise, but it does feel like the news media is really loves to find stuff like this where they good and darn well know that it's being taken out of context, that this is not what's really happening, but they're happy to put it out there because they know at the end of the day it's going to be negative on the field, right? And again, maybe that's what's going on. Maybe it's just the fact they wanted, it was a slow news day and they wanted something to get out there, and people, and again, it gets somebody's attention without blowing something up. And maybe that's why they did it. But again, the problem is, it was a big deal, but it was also obviously not real from the word go, but it's still got a lot of traction. And the media wants to push that kind of thing because, again, ultimately, it makes people think that the phenomena itself is just not a real thing.
Speaking of media frenzies, my good friend Bob Antone, who's an incredible musician and researcher, and people should go and find him on YouTube. Just Google Bob Antone, or go back and watch one of the episodes of Talking Weird. I think he's been a guest at least twice since I've been on the Untold Radio Network. He's a great guy. He brought up the interesting point. Whatever happened with the 10-foot alien spotted in the backyard in Las Vegas in summer 2023, and that was a major media event. This is when everybody was excited about flying saucers or UFOs or UAPs at the time.
I think it's a good transition into the last, because we knew this would be the last half of the show, is because this was the year of the UFO, right? I think that's a great place to start, because it's both we have a real solid account of this event, right? Multiple videos capturing something crashing in the backyard. We have the police called out. We have the eyewitnesses immediately going onto social media and telling their story while it's fresh. This is all important stuff. Unfortunately, like, nothing happened after. Like, basically the event happens and then that's it. Nobody knows anything after that. Nothing really has happened. It's probably because nothing's happening after that. Like, it's a one night thing. It just happens and it's over. And unfortunately, the question is, well, if there was anything to know, they're not talking. No one's talking about it after that point. But it was a big event, and it's sort of encapsulated by the fact that we were already talking about UFOs and UAPs, and here this big event happens. What I found really interesting is when you hear the eyewitnesses event, right? When you hear the full story, it begs the question as to whether or not this was a physical creature that they were dealing with. They talked about how they were, that they were praying. They could hear the creature screaming when they were praying. There's a lot of reasons to hear this and say, this doesn't sound like a physical creature per se. Also, the thing crashes. Where's the craft? Right? I mean, we know something fell. We know that. That's not even a question. It was caught on camera, and cameras around that house caught the light and you could hear it hit. So something hit, but there was no debris. That begs a lot of questions. Now, again, I'm not saying there wasn't debris that wasn't cleaned up and just no one's talking about it, but to our knowledge, no real debris to speak of.
Yeah, some super strangeness with it too. Like, wasn't there a report of the creature trying to get into a piece of heavy machinery? It wasn't a
Yeah.
tractor, but it was something that wasn't a normal, automobile, and trying to
Mhm.
drive it or operate it, or at least it looked like
Yeah,
it
that
did.
was part of the story, yeah.
Just so all these nonsensical elements. So
Well,
strange.
it's nonsensical, but very common. Because how often do you get these people's accounts of what happens, and you're like, this is such a strange, weird thing to have
Right.
happened. And it's a weird detail, which almost reinforces the fact that it has to be real, because who would make that up?
That's what
I
Keel used to think. He used to think the weirder the thing, the more serious we should take it as something that may
Mhm.
have actually occurred, or at least something that the witness may actually have experienced.
Yeah. But again, it's very common for there to be some sort of weird thing occurring in these encounters, which just begs the question of, again, what really is going on here? Why is this thing behaving this way? And who knows? I mean, and again, we ain't got the Spookatron 5000 to know.
You still have to. You didn't say patent pending.
I'm sorry, patent pending.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm gonna do it.
Spookatron 5000 patent pending.
Now, perhaps what was, I suppose, the key driver or the key incident which made UAPs remain so front and
Mhm.
center in the news cycle this year was the claims of whistleblower David Grush, who appeared on a number of, News Nation
Mhm.
interviews, and there was a significant piece written in the debrief by Leslie Keane and Ralph Blumenthal, who were the same journalists who had authored the 2017 piece on
Mhm.
UAPs and the Defense Forces supposed long-running investigation into it, and the Tic Tac video and all the rest of it. And that, when that story hit in 2017, that's what started UFOs being talked about seriously by the media, perhaps for
Yeah.
the first time since before the Condon Committee, really.
Mhm.
And it was their next piece in the debrief, which kind of signaled or heralded the next
Yeah.
part of this semi rollout to an alleged disclosure that everybody,
Mhm.
the community, has been waiting for since maybe forever, but was reignited with the article
Yeah.
by Blumenthal and Keane in the New York Times. And of course, Grush made all of these claims. He talked about there being multiple crash retrievals around the planet. He talked about Mussolini capturing something in, I think, 1930 something. He talked
Mhm.
about non-human biological, I can't remember the exact term, but it was like non-human biological
Uh,
samples. What was
my
the term?
Yeah, it wasn't even debris. I think he just said biologics,
Yeah, like there
non-human
was so
biologics.
he
Yeah.
was saying it wasn't just a machine, there was something inside
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
machine. And interestingly, of course, he was somebody who had helped author the whistleblower um, legislation that had been put in
Mhm.
place prior to him coming
Yeah.
out, which would let somebody come out and blow the whistle on UFOs. So he writes, I think, with a number of, I think Marco Rubio was involved. There are a number of
Mhm.
fairly well-known other, Congress types involved. And then he came out and he began to make these claims, and again in the debrief and in News Nation. And he was a decorated Afghanistan combat veteran and a former Air Force intelligence
Mhm.
officer who worked in the National Intelligence Agency and had all these kind of inside connections. And supposedly, while he said he'd never seen anything himself, he'd been told all of these
Yeah.
things. So then all of this excitement around this led up to the congressional hearings, which
Mhm.
we had in the summer, where, along with Ryan Graves and David Fravor, who were two of the most front and center military witnesses who the media had rolled out multiple times since the Tic Tac video and the New York Times story in 2017, who'd seen these things, and one of them had been the commander of the jet that had filmed the Tic Tac
Yeah.
videos, which everybody's common with. So these were very prominent witnesses, and flanked by those two men, Grush had
Mhm.
I suppose, a press frenzied congressional report where
Yeah.
everybody was talking about. It was like the news cycle for that week, at least certainly in UFO field, but generally it was big news. It was all over the news, and it was, people thought, okay, we're getting closer to disclosure. But as Ken Rock said, we didn't really get anything out of that hadn't already been talked about in ufology for decades. And Grush, every time I suppose a congressman or congresswoman seemed to try to buttonhole him into saying something, he'd always say, well, I can talk to you later in, what's the term, a congressional?
A skiff.
Skiff. I want to say sled or sleigh because it's Christmas time. But skiff. Congressional sleigh. Ho, ho, ho. But so that was the centerpiece of the story of ufology this year. This is probably one of the biggest UFO stories since the Tic Tac video, really.
Yeah, and we'd had another meeting earlier, another hearing earlier that year, which just was the dullest thing ever, where we don't know anything, we've never seen anything, we just know this is weird stuff. And of course, everyone kept asking questions. They're like, well, that was outside our purview, and that was outside our purview. And then we get the Grush thing. He's doing this deliberately. He knows he's doing this deliberately. For those who are listening, this is Donnie Cho says David Grush is the Captain America of the UFO field. Donnie, we both know what you're doing here, and I love it. I love you for it. But anyway, that's why I was smiling earlier, because I kept seeing his comments, and it's like, Donnie. Anyway, so we actually had two hearings, but yeah, the David Grush was like the big one, where a lot of stuff happened. But at the same time, I think you had the best observation of the entire, like, everyone talked about it, everyone tore it apart. They were, again, some of my favorite stuff out of it came from the fact that they were saying, hey, Congress, they've been misappropriating your money. All this money you thought was going over here is actually going over here. That was, I think, the biggest thing to come out of the material itself. But you had, I think, the best observation is, it's not what was being said by the witnesses. It was who was sitting behind David Grush. That was really the big sort of issue that people weren't paying attention to. It's like, that's really what we should be seeing, is who, the people who are sitting behind him. I think tells a much more, a much bigger story, and really puts it more into context.
Well, certainly it was very apparent that Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, who had been front and center in public UFO attempts at disclosure and publicizing the Bob Lazar story. George Knapp, going back to the very beginning, is the person who broke the Bob Lazar story. And more recently in the Bob Lazar documentary, directed by Corbell and produced by Knapp. So the fact that they were front and center behind Grush and behind Favreau and behind Graves, it was almost like the moment that Bob Lazar was able to have, in the sun, really. I mean, he wasn't there himself, but here are his biggest, I suppose, popularizers there at this congressional hearing. And it sent a message to people, at least in the UFO community, that there was some, at least that's how I read it, that here is some final, almost,
Validation.
Validation's the right word I was looking for. Here seems to be some validation of what Lazar has been saying since the 80s, and what people like Knapp and Corbell have been popularizing since that period, and what's being said in front of them by the witnesses is perhaps the answer to some of these questions, or is perhaps at least proof that it wasn't just all a hogwash invented story. Now, I mean, I didn't take away from that thinking that, but I think that's a fairly potent and obvious thing for somebody in the UFO community to read when they were watching those hearings.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the messages, which, again, considering who was next to Corbell and Knapp, which is sort of the next part of the conversation I think we're going to have, in many ways, should undermine Lazar's story even further. I mean, we famously have talked about this. I know I've talked about this. It's like, if Lazar's really saying these deep, dark secrets and the government doesn't want him saying it, why is he still sucking air? because they had plenty of opportunities to take him out in the 80s and early 90s without any problems. It's like they could have taken him out that fast, no issue. And the fact that they were both there.
Well,
in many ways, to
yeah,
your point, like you said, it feels like they're trying to say Lazar's legit, which, considering who they were all sitting next to,
right,
being the swampiest of the swamp,
right.
and really that whole thing should undermine Lazar. But you're right, to everyone else, there could be like, see, Bob Lazar was right, but you were the one who picked up on the other people sitting on that row.
I did, and I have to walk some of that back a little bit, because Grush's attorney was Charles McCulloch, who had been the former intelligence community inspector general, and he was there behind Grush in the witness kind of, or the support seat saved for Grush, which traditionally people often have their lawyers in. And while his firm, which was a very significant legal firm in Washington, had kind of walked away from having initially being Grush's lawyers. They were at first when he came forward, and then there was all these weird news kind of press releases that they weren't actually representing him anymore. But then we came to the hearing, and his attorney, Charles McCulloch, is sitting again. Now, what I said at the time, and I was sure of it, and I've heard other people say it's inaccurate now, and a couple other people made the claim as well, is there was a man there who looked exactly like Charles McCulloch's old boss, and that was James Clapper. Yeah. But people have said that wasn't Clapper. So at the time, I was all about it. I was all like, I saw him. That is definitely James Clapper. And it made total sense to me, because I knew that he was the boss of Charles McCulloch when they both were working in the Obama administration. But I've since heard people say, no, he just looked exactly like Clapper. It wasn't exactly Clapper.
They just happen to have it. They just happen to have a James Clapper stand-in.
I know, but that's even weird. I mean, if you want to get conspiratorial, that's even weirder, because let's say that, and I'll believe the people who are saying that really wasn't Clapper. So let's just accept that for a moment. Doesn't it become even weirder that they would put a dead ringer, like somebody who now I'm being and I'm normally not Mr. Conspiracy.
Yeah, you're not the conspiracist here.
No, but now I'm like, why would you throw in somebody there who, if it wasn't Clapper, who looks exactly like Charles McCulloch's old boss next to him? Like, it's just, to me, and it was like one of those, it was like something out of a Robert Anton Wilson novel, you know, the Illuminatus series of
exactly,
and with all this super high strangeness and weird things that didn't make sense to anybody other than a small clique of insiders playing games with the rest of us. So at that moment, I was just like, I don't even know what to say about this anymore. I thought I'd worked it all out. Now I'm either an idiot, or it's far more complicated than even I ever thought.
Well, but this goes back to the whole problem, right? It's like there's a way these things sort of, whistleblowers are normally handled. The problem is everyone who's come out as a whistleblower since 2017 has been treated very, very differently. And there's enough weird around Grush and around some of these other people to say, hey, maybe this isn't what's being said isn't what's really being said. Again, as we used to talk about on Mysterious Library all the time, it very much seems like the United States government wants us to believe that there was a crash in Roswell. They'll say, well, no, they've denied it for years, but look at how they've denied it. It's sort of like when, when someone comes to you like, did you eat the last pizza? No, I would never eat the last slice of pizza. I'm not denying it. I'm saying I ate the pizza. That's how they've been saying it the entire time. Again, famously, Michael Heiser said their explanation in the late 90s when they came out and said, here's the truth about Roswell, and it was the time compression thing for the bodies. He's like, that is the dumbest answer I've ever heard in my life. There's no reason to say that. It sounds like you're lying. And he's like, why would they do something that would make you question and say, well, that's not real? They know, so it has to be a lie.
Yeah, for audience, just quickly for audience members who don't know, because this is such an excellent point. When the U.S. Air Force released, I think it was called Roswell Case Closed. I used to own it. I don't anymore. Their document, it was a fairly decent sized publication as well. It was thick and like letter size, And they said when people reported bodies at Roswell, they were really reporting U.S. crash test dummies that had been dropped there, which hadn't been dropped until the 1950s, incidentally. So when reporters called out the US Air Force spokesman when they did this big announcement and released the book and said, how are witnesses saying that they remember seeing bodies, but you didn't drop these things till 1952 or something, but these witnesses are saying it happened in 1947. And you're right. The general's answer was, well, it's something we think of as time compression.
Yeah.
And so Heiser said, what does that even mean? And his point was only that they'd have to be saying this to make people think they were lying, because it was such a ridiculous explanation. People are just going to believe the original traditional conspiratorial version of Roswell all the more, that they were covering up the crash of an extraterrestrial craft, because that made more sense than time compression.
Yeah. And so it goes back to, if the United States, and again, starting in 1980, probably 79 actually, we have OSI infiltrating the UFO community and creating these ideas and creating a lot of what you'd call the X-Files view of the UFO phenomena, which is what's being put forward by Grush. And I just forgot his name.
Bob Lazar.
No, well, Bob Lazar too, but 2017 TikTok, he was Elizondo.
Oh yeah.
And Louis Elizondo. Like, it's like they're pushing that idea pretty hard. And it's one of those things where you look at these committee hearings and it really should give you pause. Not because, oh, it's disclosure, they're finally telling us the truth and and it's been in the news media and everyone's finally talking about it because it's disclosure. The fact that it's going this way and the people involved should beg at least a little bit of a second thought. It's like, maybe they're not being as truthful as we think as you would like them to be, or that they are presenting themselves as. There could be far more going on here. And I think really that congressional hearing should give you enough reason to pause and say, maybe it's not what I think. Maybe it's not what it's being sold as. Maybe there is something else going on here, and it's worthy of a second look.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't take anybody's announcements at face value, especially when they're coming from official organs that might have a very real reason for wanting to distract us or make us look in the wrong direction. We don't have time to talk about it now, but the other funny thing was a month or so after, of course, the Mexican UFO hearings where Jamie Mawson rolled out some more alien mummies.
We can't give it total justice on because since we've come to the end of the hour, but go back and look at the Mysterious Library episode. We did a whole episode on Jaime, and long story short, it's like they said in Futurama: fool me 6 or 7 times, shame on you. Fool me 7 or 8 times or more, shame on you.
And that's right. It's Jaime Mawson. I said Jamie Mawson, because I just thought how it was spelled. Yeah, you were right. No, I said Jamie. So it is.
But I forgot his last name right after you said it. I'm like, I know it's Jaime. Yeah. Anyway, but point is, between the two of us, we got his name right once.
But that's why I needed you as my co-host on Mysterious Library.
Yeah. But so that's the other thing that happened this year. Again, this was really the year of the UFO UAP. That's really what this year was, and all the more reasons to maybe question what we're being told, particularly in disclosure.
Indeed. What about, because I teased it in the show notes a little bit, what about looking into the future? Does Jason McLean have any predictions that perhaps they're a very flamboyant or clickbait term, but do you have any sense of what might come down the pike in any of these areas we've been talking about? What directions do you think the community are going to go into? Is there going to be any changes in the cryptozoology, ufology, specter hunting, any of these things?
Okay. So here's the thing: if I make a prediction, it probably means it won't happen. So I mean, that's how bad my prediction skills are. But I'll say this: one thing I didn't mention during the cryptozoology section is the rise of AI being images being created and then passed off as real. It's like you and I can, you work with AI. I'm an artist, so it's like I can tell at least 9 times out of 10 when I'm looking at something that's AI. That's just sort of an AI generated thing. But people are taking it, they're being presented again out of context as real stuff That happened this year. I think we're going to get way more of it this year, to the point where, unless there's an actual body, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to come to any conclusions anymore. I'd like to predict that I find a pterosaur this year and bring it in.
I want a photo of you next to its body. You've shot
Yeah.
down, blasted down over your property in Texas.
Well, trust me, I would still get a ticket. I would still probably go to jail for firing a gun in the city. You still can't do that even in Texas. However, there are other ways. But yeah, it's like, I would like to say this year somebody gets actually shoots a pterosaur. I would hate for it to be killed, but let's be honest, we need a body. But yeah, I think we're going to see the rise of AI, so that unless there's a body, it's never going to count. This may be the last year that any photo or video evidence is even eligible for being considered real. Just saying.
So Horace Smith says Jason is Professor Challenger. I'll have one little poke at the future, and this is wishful thinking, might be inaccurate, but in a way, I think we've talked about it before, Mysterious Library. For people paying attention, whatever your belief system is on any of this stuff, a lot of the people who are front and center of disclosure, whether that's Tom DeLonge, the ex-singer from Blink-182 and Angels and Airwaves, who is the founder of the To the Stars Academy, or whether it's Hal Puthoff, who's long been involved in paranormal and ufological research and was also one of the main members of To the Stars Academy, or whether it's Leslie Kean, or whether it's David Grush, or now even Tucker Carlson, who I like Carlson a lot, but he was somebody who's always been on top of the UFO story. It was weird to see it always so important on his show. But all of these people are saying similar things that not many people are paying attention to. All of them are saying this is something real. This isn't the extraterrestrial type interpretation that's been put forward. Some of them, like Tucker, is saying this is very dark and very scary, and I don't even want to look at it. People like Leslie Kean are saying these things from elsewhere. David Grush, in his congressional testimony, started to talk about things in other dimensions punching into this dimension. Kean has said similar things. Again, the journalist who with Blumenthal was the one who broke the Tic Tac story and the Defense Department's ongoing investigations on the front cover of the New York Times in 2017, and was the first journalist to push the David Grush story. Puthoff, as I mentioned, wrote that significant piece, which we did, on Mysterious Library and Ultra-Terrestrial, suggesting whatever these things are, maybe we should be looking at another interpretation than extraterrestrial. So there seems to be some real movers and shakers, either in the press who follow this story, or in the people who are actually the whistleblowers, and the people in between, of saying that this is real. This is not ET. So if we're hearing it from those kind of sources, I wonder, I don't think the ufological community is caught up yet, but I wonder if we're finally going to get a move towards that kind of John Keelian, Jacques Valléan, may I say Michael Heiser-esque interpretation of what the nature of this phenomenon is.
You know what? So here's the thing. I tend to agree that's where this is all going. I think that will be it'll be more popularized. I'd like to say from your lips to God's ears, because I think that it does, again, make my job a little bit easier with what my argument is on the whole subject. But I also see it as the foundation, as we talked with Marquise Williams actually this year over on my former show, is like, hey, they're building this platform of interdimensionality because they're trying to get people to accept essentially the materialist witch perspective that C.S. Lewis wrote about, right? And so it's like a demon can literally walk up to you, talk at you, be a demon in all respects and with all of its powers and everything, but you'd still think of it as something material because you're able to somehow put the sci-fi word interdimensional on it. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent, because I think the bigger point here is with a lot of this stuff is to make you not realize what it is you're dealing with. So I agree with you. I think that's definitely going to be coming this year, of, sort of the acceptance of the interdimensional theory. Well, again, a very Keelian viewpoint.
Indeed. And may I say, Jason, what a pleasure to have you co-hosting with me again. I've missed you. It's great to have you back. And I hope that you and everybody else out there has just a fantastic new year and all the very best for 2024, my friend, and all my friends in the chat and all my friends who are watching and listening. You're all my friends if you watch the show. So thank you.
Happy New Year, everyone.
And until I see you next year,
Yes.
keep it weird.